We are live with Congressman Jim McGovern, who just took over as the new chairman of the House Rules Committee. Congressman, do you want to just walk us through your chairmanship and what the Rules Committee does?
Well, I'm thrilled to have this honor to be the chair of the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee is essentially the traffic cop of Congress. I mean, every major piece of legislation goes through the Rules Committee before it goes to the House floor. We decide whether bills can be amended, whether, there can be one amendment or 100 amendments made in order, or sometimes we decide that bills have to be voted straight up or down. We also resolve jurisdictional issues between committees. If Ways and Means and Energy and Commerce have an interest in a particular piece of legislation, but they have different points of views, we sometimes serve as the arbiter to find out how we resolve it. So it's a great committee. You get a chance to have your fingerprints on every piece of legislation. And for me, I have a long history with the Rules Committee. I mean, when I was a young aide to Congressman Joe Moakley of Boston, he was on the Rules Committee, and he became the chair of the Rules Committee while I was here. And I saw him run this committee with fairness and integrity and honesty, and he's a great mentor, and I hope that I can be, a chair in the tradition of Mr. Moakley. I think the place needs to be more accommodating, more open. I mean, the Republicans have run the Rules Committee in a very closed way. They presided over the most closed Congress in the history of the United States, and they basically said no to everybody. And I just thought that was a terrible way to run the House. When Moakley became chair of the committee, a reporter grabbed him and said, "Hey, now you can settle all your old scores with people you don't like because, or people who weren't good to you because you have that power." And Moakley's response was, "No, to me, power is the ability to," he said, "No, power to some people is the ability to say no. He said, power to me is the ability to say yes." And I think that's what the Rules Committee should be, a place where yes is more often the answer than no. So it's great to be here. We just had a rules package that we passed on the floor, which is going to ensure that this House runs professionally. We have a special select committee on the climate crisis. We have items to ban discrimination against LGBTQ individuals. We ensure that bills have to actually have hearings before they come to the Rules Committee. I mean, there's 1,000 things in it that are really good. We even give delegates, like the delegate who represents the District of Columbia, voting privileges on the House floor because the people of the District of Columbia deserve to be represented as well. So we passed that last night. I became chair officially last night. My mother and father were here. My father's 80 years old, and he was here and got to see his son not only sworn into another term in Congress, but become chair of the Rules Committee. And late afternoon yesterday, we were talking about what we needed to get in preparation for our first hearing. And one of the things that somebody noted was I don't have a gavel, and chairs have to have a gavel to begin and end hearings. And my father, who owns a package store in Worcester, for many years, a long time ago, was the president of the Worcester County Package Store Association. And so he brought me a present, and that is the gavel that he used as the president of the Worcester County Package Store Association. So this is the gavel that I will use in the Rules Committee. And it says on it here, Walter McGovern, president of the Worcester County Package Store Association. And so every time I'm behind there, I will be thinking of my dad. So it's really a wonderful moment in my life.
And Congressman, do you want to show us here around the Rules Committee?
Yeah, well, in the Rules Committee office, like my personal office, I like to surround myself with things that are meaningful to me. I mean, I work for Joe Moakley, who was the chair for a while. That's a picture of him at the State of the Union address. He had just been diagnosed with cancer. And George W. Bush, who I disagree with on almost everything, but nonetheless was a decent guy, knew Moakley was dying and actually acknowledged him at the State of the Union address, and that's a picture of Moakley. This is John Kerry and me, we're coming back from Cuba, where we opened the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Cuba for the first time in over 50 years. It was a historic moment. This is George McGovern, who I worked for during my college years with Bill Clinton, and we were in the White House. But this is the meeting in which we came up with the idea for a global school feeding program I introduced legislation shortly afterwards. It became the George McGovern Robert Dole Food for Education program, feeding millions of kids in some of the poorest countries around the world. And yes, more McGovern paraphernalia, George McGovern and Sergeant Shriver, who I think was a wonderful man as well. We got a picture of Joe Moakley over here as well. Here is a picture of Archbishop Oscar Romero from El Salvador. I spent a lot of time when I worked for Moakley in Central America and El Salvador in particular, fighting on behalf of refugees who were fleeing violence there. We did the investigation of the murders of 6 Jesuit priests who were killed there in 1989. Oscar Romero was an archbishop who was murdered by death squads in 1980. And he just recently became, Pope Francis just made him a saint. But I have many, many pictures of Archbishop Romero because his philosophy is that, you know, people in government in particular, people in the church, people in all walks of life who are privileged or well off have a special obligation to the poor. That everything we do ought to be aimed at lifting up the poor in this country, and it's one of the it's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly we need to end hunger in this country, is because I think it's such a terrible injustice that we can fix. And my love Trump's hate picture, which you could tell the Republicans no longer occupy this office. So so this is the official rules office where the chair sits, and then in here this is the committee room, and you know, in this committee room, you know, it's kind of small for a committee room, but this is where you know, kind of we make all our big decisions about legislation. Most of the people who testify before the Rules Committee are members of Congress, and we meet more than any other committee, and our committee hearings, I think, are longer than most committee meetings. Up there you see a picture of Joe Moakley, his portrait. Next to him is Congressman Claude Pepper from Florida, who was the chair when I first came here. And then Louise Slaughter, who was the most recent chairwoman from New York City, the first woman ever to be the chair of the Rules Committee, so she's made history. And here's this big chandelier, which is quite incredible. And I have to tell you, you know, I shouldn't say this, but and this is sometimes where I feel, sometimes these hearings go on forever and ever and ever in this committee. Sometimes we meet late at night at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I sit here and if somebody's like rambling on forever and ever, I secretly wish that this chandelier would fall. It just never does. But in any event, so this is the committee, and again, I'm really excited about what's about to happen.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman.
Thank you.